All right, so today we're diving deep into the 18th century slave trade with this book, Mutiny on the Black Prince.
By James H. Sweet.
Yeah, James A. Sweet, that's right. We've both finished it.
Yes.
And we're excited to share kind of some of the key takeaways that we got from it and hopefully, make you want to read it too.
Yeah. What I really liked about this book, is that it wasn't just a dry history.
Right.
It was actually really engaging and really almost like an adventure story.
Yeah.
It was really fascinating.
Yeah, Ryan.
And these are all real events.
Yeah, it reminded me.
It's not historical fiction. These are real people.
Yeah, it reminded me of those historical fiction novels that you just can't put down. But
Exactly.
this is like that, but real, which is crazy.
Exactly.
And it really focuses on this guy named John Fowler, who goes from being a simple ship worker to a wealthy merchant.
Right.
But obviously, there's more to that story.
Yeah, his journey is anything but straightforward. The slave trade itself in the 18th century was a very risky business. You had, huge potential profits, but also devastating losses. So, John Fowler, faced near-death experiences, even state-sanctioned piracy.
I know, that was a crazy part.
Against French ships. He had a license to basically steal.
It's wild.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up. And it makes you realize that the slave trade wasn't just about buying and selling people. It was a gamble.
Yeah.
With like huge, huge risks involved.
Yeah.
And you even mentioned a detail earlier about the ship Lime.
Oh, the Lime.
Yeah. This really highlights this.
Yes, the Lime is, the book tells a story about this ship called the Lime. And it faced so many risks. It had illness outbreaks, battles with French privateers. They even relied on Egg-Boshery slave marines for defense.
That is wild. They armed the very people they were exploiting.
I know. It's
crazy. It just shows how desperate, they were.
And so
where does the Black Prince, the actual ship that the title of the book is about, fit into all of this?
Well, the Black Prince is it's kind of John Fowler's masterpiece. This is his big venture into the slave trade. And he partnered with, a powerful politician named James LaRoche Jr.
Okay.
And, they had money, influence, and together they built this ship.
Yeah.
They secured all the supplies. They got the crew. The book describes the crew as a motley crew.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Which I think is a huge understatement. But yeah.
So we've got this risky venture, a ship full of questionable characters, and you can already feel that there's danger lurking.
Oh, yeah.
But before we get into the mutiny itself,
I
want to talk a little bit about the setting of the book.
Yes.
Bristol in 1768.
Oh, Bristol. Yes.
What was it like back then?
Bristol was a very bustling court city. Lots of wealth coming in from the slave trade.
Right.
But also at the same time, there's poverty.
Right.
There was kind of like this social unrest that was brewing, kind of this atmosphere of exploitation. The book does a really good job of capturing this contrast between, the lavish lives of those who were profiting from the slave trade and then the brutal reality for everyone else.
And even though slavery was technically illegal in England at the time, the book mentions this chilling detail that Black people in Bristol could still be kidnapped and shipped back to the West Indies.
Oh, absolutely.
So freedom was really precarious.
Yes.
Especially for Black people.
Very much so.
And this backdrop of kind of social tension makes this whole story even more intriguing.
Oh, yeah.
Because you've got this resentment, rebellion brewing beneath the surface.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So it's not just about what's happening on the ship. It's about the whole context.
Yeah, it's like the whole society is kind of implicated in what's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this powder keg of a city, this ship full of questionable characters, and a trade built on exploitation. What could possibly go wrong, right?
Right.
The Black Prince sets sail.
Yeah, and things don't stay calm for very long.
Okay.
We talked about that motley crew earlier.
Yeah.
Well, imagine all those, kind of sketchy characters crammed together on this 18th century ship.
Right.
The conditions were just awful, really cramped and unsanitary. The heat was
I
brutal.
can imagine.
Disease was a constant threat.
Right.
And, just the whole psychological toll of participating in the slave trade.
Yeah.
I mean, that had to weigh on them. All of that just created this environment where mutiny was almost inevitable.
Yeah, it's like all these ingredients are just bubbling in this pot, ready to boil over.
Exactly.
But the book doesn't just jump straight into the mutiny, right?
No.
It kind of slowly builds up the tension. Like, what was life like for those sailors? What really pushed them to the edge?
Yeah, the book does a great job of giving you these little glimpses into the lives of the sailors. You get this sense of their exhaustion, their fear, the growing resentment towards the officers.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the physical hardship.
Right.
They're also witnessing the horrific treatment of the enslaved Africans. And that has to have some kind of impact on their conscience, even if they don't want to admit it.
Yeah, like this moral darkness is just kind of seeping into everything on the ship.
Yeah, definitely.
And then there's Thomas Austin, the ringleader of the mutiny. We mentioned he was a former ship owner.
Right.
Which makes him a very different kind of character in this whole story.
Yeah, he's definitely not your average disgruntled sailor.
Right.
Austin, he's ambitious.
Yeah.
He's cunning, and he has this aura of authority about him that really draws people to him. It makes you think that he's not just trying to escape.
Right.
He wants power, like a dark mirror image of John Fowler almost.
Well, I like that. A dark mirror. So he's not just looking for a slightly better deal. He's aiming for the top spot.
Exactly.
So how does the mutiny actually play out? Is it a bloody takeover? Do the enslaved Africans play a part?
Well, I don't want to spoil everything.
Sure.
Let's just say that the book does not disappoint. The mutiny is chaotic, violent, and full of twists that you don't see coming.
Okay.
And the fate of the enslaved Africans is really woven into the story in a way that will really get you thinking.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my interest. Yeah. Now, obviously, they don't just, sail off into the sunset after the mutiny. What happens next?
Well, now they have this stolen ship,
right?
A rebellious crew, and no clear destination. They need supplies. They need a safe haven. So this takes them on this crazy journey across the Atlantic. They make a very risky stop in Brazil.
Oh, wow.
To blend in, resupply, and maybe even turn a quick profit.
Wait, so they staged a mutiny against a slave ship captain.
Yeah.
And then they try to sell enslaved Africans in Brazil.
Yeah. It's a really interesting twist, and it highlights how complicated the situation is.
Okay.
These guys are rebels, yes.
Right.
But they're also products of their time. They're trapped in the system.
Right.
And it's hard to escape even when you're actively fighting against it.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to outrun their own shadows.
Exactly.
So how long does this little adventure last?
Not long.
Okay.
Remember John Fowler?
Oh, yeah, he's not going to just let this slide.
No, he does not let things go easily.
Okay.
He wants to get his ship back, and he wants revenge.
Right.
So the book describes this intense global manhunt.
Wow.
Fowler uses all his money, his influence, his connections to track down these mutineers.
Yeah.
He's pulling strings, pressuring authorities. He basically turns the entire Atlantic world into his own personal chessboard.
Man. It's like he's playing a real-life game of Risk.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
So this is more than just a revenge story. It's about power control.
Yeah.
The lengths that people will go to protect what they have.
Yeah.
Were there any close calls during this manhunt?
Oh, yeah. There are some incredible moments.
Okay.
One that stands out is the capture of John Scholes.
Okay.
He was one of the mutineers, and they found him all the way in Suriname.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
That's incredible.
He thought he'd escaped.
Wow.
He went to this Dutch colony on the other side of the world.
Right.
But Fowler's reach was just that long.
It just shows you how much power these merchants had.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
So what about Thomas Austin, the mastermind behind all of this?
Yeah, Austin's story takes some very unexpected turns.
Okay.
Some of the mutineers get caught. They get brought back to England. They face trial. But Austin manages to stay hidden for a while.
Yeah.
But just when you think he's gotten away with it, the book throws in another curveball.
Oh, come on. You can't leave us hanging like that.
We've got to keep you on the edge of your seat, right?
Okay. I can't wait to hear what happens. But before we get into that, I'm curious about the enslaved Africans on the Black Prince.
Yeah.
Does their situation change at all after the mutiny?
That's a question that really stayed with me after reading the book.
Yeah.
You'd hope that their situation would improve.
Right.
Maybe the mutineers would see them as allies or even free them. But the book paints a more complicated picture.
Okay.
Their fate is really tied to the choices that the mutineers make.
Hmm.
And it's not always a happy ending.
Right.
It's just a stark reminder that the system of slavery was so deeply entrenched
Yeah.
that even in moments of rebellion, it was incredibly hard to break.
That's a really powerful point.
Yeah.
Makes you realize just how pervasive that system was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so where did we leave off? Oh, yeah. Thomas Austin's on the run. John Feller's out for blood. What happens to our ambitious, rebellious, I guess we could say, former ship owner?
Well, you're not going to believe this. He ends up in Boston, in jail.
Wait, he led a mutiny against a slave ship and ends up in jail for piracy.
Yeah, the irony's not lost, is it?
It's pretty thick. So how does he end up in a Boston jail?
Well, you see, Fowler was playing the long game.
Wow.
He wasn't just after his ship back. He wanted to make an example out of Austin.
So a warning to anyone else who might get any ideas, right?
Exactly. Don't mess with the merchant elite. So he used all his influence and power to get Austin arrested.
Okay, but what were the actual charges against him? What did they pin on him?
Well, it wasn't just about stealing the Black Prince. They accused him of the willful murder of the ship's cook, Alan McCoy.
Oh, wow.
They used eyewitness accounts and even got a confession out of Austin.
Oh, that was all over for him then, right?
Not so fast.
Yeah.
While he was in that Boston jail awaiting trial, he escaped.
No way. He escapes from a Boston jail. How? Did he have help?
The book kind of hints that he might have had sympathizers, people who saw him as a symbol of resistance.
Okay, I can see that.
But regardless, he gets out.
So he just vanishes. Poof. Gone. What happens next?
Well, we know he makes it back to England eventually, but he's a wanted man. He has to live in the shadows, far cry from the powerful pirate captain, I'm sure, that he envisioned for himself.
It's a pretty inglorious ending. What about the other mutineers? What happens to them?
Most of them were captured and brought back to England for trial.
Right.
And the book, really gets into the details of the trials, and it's a stark reminder of how the British legal system was used to maintain control and crush dissent. Some were sent to penal colonies, others met even worse fates.
So justice, or at least the law, wins in the end, I guess you could say.
In a way, yeah, though maybe not in the way you'd expect. But, the book doesn't end there. It also explores what happens to John Fowler.
Okay, right, because he's not off the hook either, morally at least.
Exactly. And, it's fascinating because the book goes beyond just Fowler himself and traces what happens to his family, his descendants. They use their wealth, the wealth accumulated from the slave trade, to establish a dynasty.
So the sins of the father are passed down, huh?
Well, it makes you think about the legacy of these actions, right? It's not just contained to one generation.
Wow, it's a lot to consider. Well, we've covered mutiny, piracy, manhunts, trials, family legacies. I mean, what a story. What for you makes Mutiny on the Black Prince such a compelling read?
For me, it's the way that it takes a period of history that's often presented in a very dry, factual way and makes it human. You connect with the people involved, their choices, their struggles. It's a story with moral ambiguity, not just good and evil, and that makes it all the more fascinating.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's thought-provoking, it's engaging, and it definitely makes you question everything you thought you knew about the slave trade.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I know I'm adding Mutiny on the Black Prince to my reading list. I highly recommend it to anyone listening. And that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.